and welcome to The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. My guest today is Todd Solondz, who had a life that many people aspired to be in the movie business might admire. He had several multi-picture deals, got a picture made with a Golden organization, decided for some reason it wasn't good enough, took a sabbatical to teach English as a second language, and returned to the movie business with a remarkable and, I guess safe to say, bleakly comic movie about adolescence called Welcome to the Dollhouse. Todd Solondz is my guest today. Todd, welcome.
Thank you.
I know you said that the girl in this movie clearly is not you, but did you see, I guess you should tell a little bit what the movie's about, first of all.
Well, for me, it really comes down to an exploration of childhood, of a certain time. That's the a farewell, actually, to childhood, where that meets the onset of adolescence. For some reason, there's a lot of cruelty that is brought into relief at that time of life. Emotions are very raw. There's a certain intensity. In the way things are felt, and so there's something I suppose almost primal about that age. We're talking 11, 12, 13, and I hadn't seen the subject really dealt seriously in an American movie before. So, I mean, I'm used to seeing. I mean, the genesis, let me say, of the writing of this had been my seeing an episode of The Wonder Years,
which is nothing like anybody's real life at all. It sort of takes off. It's set in what I like to call the generic past, in the same way that American Graffiti and Happy Days were, and it sort of like lays caramel over the past or over childhood.
Well, it is a very well, it's got an audience. Certainly, I think actually a much larger audience, I think, than my movie will ever reach. What struck me is exactly what you're saying, is how little it bore any resemblance to my memory or understanding of childhood. I couldn't think of any American films that had dealt with it. I could think of European ones, but I couldn't think of any American ones. So,
do you think of maybe River's Edge or Over the Edge? They sort of try to get at that.
Yeah. It's funny that you mention those two, actually, because when I first had to describe the movie before I went into production, when I was in the prep stage, and people like to come up with that formula of it's X movie meets Y movie, I thought of River's Edge meets Over the Edge. After the movie was finished, people told me it was Heather's meets Muriel's Wedding, although I think I prefer the Brady Bunch movie meets Kids. At this point in time, if you have to, for whatever those formulas are worth.
Now, let's take a little time to actually talk about it. Forget the formula. We've got a little bit of time to kill here. You mentioned that you really hadn't seen a movie that specifically related to the kind of casual cruelty and an utter misunderstanding about sex that children of that age had. And then last year came Kids, and I guess I would say certainly the big difference, the kid was sort of affectless and had that sort of same use of the director, his sort of, I think, fascination with like young skin. You know, he fetishized those kids in that movie, and you don't do that here. It really is about Dawn, your lead character, trying to find her place in the world. I mean, it feels almost like a short story more so than the movie.
Well, it is. I think what I am a great admirer of Larry Clark, and I think what he was striving for was something very different from what I'm after. I think that. I mean, it's ironic, I suppose, that we were in fact shooting at the exact same time, but they were the big movie, and finished a year earlier than we did. But notwithstanding what you see on the news each night, or on Oprah or whatever talk show, or the papers, or on radio, I don't believe that most kids, 11, 12, 13, who are growing up middle class in the suburbs here, are in fact having sex, or are shooting up in their parents' bedroom, or are killing their teachers. Now, these things do happen, but I think that they are the exception, the anomaly, and that really junior high school, I think, is fraught with enough terrors without having to resort to that kind of headline news, so to speak. So what I really wanted to do was, I mean, there is no actual sex, nudity, or violence in the movie, and yet it's as if it were there, because I think it is a very unsettling movie, even if it is a comedy.
Well, there's that sort of constant threat that you feel at that age where everything seems to loom large over you, and the people who want to be your friends are people who you're trying to reject because you want to sort of feel like you're growing in some way, but you're also, I think, afraid of growth too, which is what she seems to be.
Yeah, it is here we are as adults. It's easy for us, I mean, to know what is a matter of life and death. We have perspective. Kids that age certainly they can't possibly have that perspective. So everything, with everything, it's as if it were a matter of life and death. I mean, when I'm directing a movie, I can say I must have that location. It's a matter of life and death. But of course, I'm just creating illusion for myself and for everyone else. I mean, I know that really it's just a movie.
Well, but I guess that's the sort of thing that's so interesting about the picture, is that she feels at that age, the way we all feel, you feel every hurt so deeply, and she's just so deliriously happy when she's in bed with her brother's friend looking at the pictures. I mean, everything is sort of pre-sexual, but sex still plays a part in the picture.
Yeah, although I'm not sure if I would even call it pre-sexual. I mean, I think sexuality is I think part of is not something that suddenly one day you're 12 years old and you become a sexual being. I think that sexuality has its way of manifesting itself in children in ways that perhaps are a little more oblique or latent. And I think that at this age, I mean, it's a very tender, very sensitive time here we're talking about. I just I feel tremendously fortunate that nobody's attacked me, trounced on me for what I've tried to do here.
Why do you think that would happen? You mentioned that.
Well, just using the word rape. I mean, it's such a hot button word. You just use it. Here I am, a 36-year-old man, and it's a story of an 11-year-old girl, and people can be saying, what do you know about what it is to be an 11-year-old girl? Who are you to make a movie on the subject and to talk about rape or any such thing? And I've been very, very amazed at how the fact that people, I mean, there are always some oddballs, but people haven't been hostile to me, I have to say, that they have embraced what I've done. I think if I've succeeded, it must be because I think people walk away from the movie feeling that I respect the integrity of these characters, and that there's nothing you don't feel that they've been exploited, that you somehow you don't feel sullied or whatever. But one thing I might point out also is that I had wanted to call the movie Faggots and Retards, not for shock value, but because that is the language, the currency that I think kids deal in when the parents, adults, teachers, etc., are not around. It is a vocabulary that is inherited, that is handed down, trickled down from TV, pop culture, their elders, parents, whatnot. And they may know what these words mean, they may not, but they certainly can't possibly know the full, or understand the full resonance, the full meaning of what they're saying. But they know these words, that it's a forbidden vocabulary, and that these words are very powerful.
But it's also that these words are, I mean, they both sort of suggest not being a real adult, I mean, even when we were kids, I'm sure the kids used the word retard, because it meant basically you were still a kid, you hadn't grown up.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I thought about the Chuck Berry song "Almost Grown" as I was watching the picture, just because there's this sort of need that Dawn has, and Brandon too, the boy she becomes
the bully.
Yes, well, who begins a relationship with, because he's as much an outsider as she is.
I mean, that's a remarkable discovery that dawns on Dawn, that he is as much an outcast as she. I mean, this movie is not the story of a victim. I don't have any interest in victim movies or victim literature. It's just, it really has no interest for me. I think the persecuted and the persecutor reside within each of us. And to some degree or another, I mean, I know myself, I have been on both sides of the fence here. And I think most people have, to some degree or another, played both sides of the coin. And I think contending with those forces is part and parcel of growing up. Not all of us do, I suppose. But
well, it's funny, too, because we talk about these kids' movies, and I guess I'm thinking now the last 10 years, or 10 years ago, we saw a lot of movies from sort of the John Hughes factory that dealt with adolescence, and actually not the age that you're dealing with in this picture, but it's still sort of, it was almost like they basically, he was taking Alice Adams, where, the girl who was actually the prettiest girl in the movie, and nobody else besides us in the audience can recognize that she was the best person around, but you sort of take that archetype and spin it on its head. I mean, the girl who's the outsider is not the prettiest girl, or she's not the most charismatic girl. I mean,
and she's also not the smartest kid in the class, and that was something I really didn't want. The idea that this would be a girl who was in some way superior to her classmates, that she was the class genius, the savant, the mathematics expert, or the concert violinist, or the star athlete. I didn't want the character to have one of those saving graces that
gives the audience a special rooting interest.
Right. That makes it somehow. I thought there was going to be something a little narcissistic about it also. If you make for me to have a story about this girl who is the smartest kid in class and nobody understands or can appreciate her, it just didn't rub me the right way when I've seen that done. And I think there's something much more moving about the fact that she's ordinary in the most extraordinary way. It does pain me when I read some people describe her as an ugly girl. I don't believe she's ugly, but she is called ugly, and I think that's a key distinction that has to be made. Sometimes I find some people have, in a sense, fallen into the trap when they describe her, if they use the word a geek or nerd. These are words I don't think anyone can really take to seriously as in a complimentary way. They're very reductive, and I think that in essence, once you start describing her that way, you become one of her tormentors. You become a seventh grader again, and I see that actually played out in some way. In some of the articles that I've read already about the movie.
What made you decide? Well, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. My guest is Todd Solondz, the writer-director of Welcome to the Dollhouse. After sort of taking a sabbatical, what made you decide to fix on this? I'm sure you heard this question several times. Fix on this particular picture. I mean, because it really is. It's both funny and deeply felt.
Right. It is for me. I when I was reading it to myself, when I had read that first draft, I could laugh. I would laugh out loud, and at the same time say, "Oh my God, that's so horrible." I did have that dual response to what was going on. Why? I wrote this really to redeem myself from what had been a horrible experience, and I felt I don't know why. But I felt so close to these characters. Certainly not just Dawn, but equally to the bully, her older brother, etc. I felt just very. I felt I had really tapped into something here, and so it stuck with me. I never thought anyone would be foolish enough to invest money into a project whose premise is so unpromising. But years later, I was wrong.
But you wrote a movie, essentially, that you thought would be unpromising in terms of its potential to get made.
Right, I did, but I wrote it because I wanted to write it, not because I actually thought I would actually make it. You can dream of that, but the impulse had really been to tell a story, to put these characters down, and to find a structure for it. When I somehow I struck a chord with this movie. There is some universality of experience here that you can't plan on tapping into. I'm incredibly lucky and gratified that it has elicited the kind of response it has so far. And but it is a tricky movie. I've always felt. I mean,
Tricky, what do you mean?
well, as you yourself have said, I mean, on the one hand, there's a certain it's funny in a sort of ironic way, a wry sort of edge, and yet on the other hand, it's very painful and even excruciating at times, but sometimes very moving. And the fact is that this is all simultaneously going on. Makes it tricky for how do you respond to what you see going on here? Do you laugh, or oh my God, how could I be laughing? Or some people walk out of the movie saying, "Oh, Todd, that was great. It was hilarious. You dead on." And then other people walk out saying, "Oh, Todd, it's just so moving," and are completely blinded or oblivious to the humor that is at each instant attached to the story.
I'm wondering if kids the age of the characters in the picture have seen the movie, or if you've seen it with that audience and how they respond to it.
I would love more than anything to get a junior high school audience, but the movie is rated R, and so it's hard to get any school behind the movie. Now.
But it's just rated R because of the language, basically, isn't it?
And subject matter, but even I think just the fact that it's not just that it's bad language, but it's bad language coming out of 11-year-olds
who are
mouth.
smoking and
right, and I do think there's also probably it's even this isn't. I can't say that there's any evidence of this, but I do sense that it's even more sensitive because it's a little girl rather than a little boy.
Well, did you do that because it's going to certainly create a greater wave of empathy from the audience? Is that why you decided to make your protagonist a young girl?
For a couple of reasons. One is I had already made a short film about a little boy, similar age, but a different kind of character and a different kind of story. But I didn't want to retread the same grounds, and so I didn't want to deal with another little boy. But more importantly, I think that there is something to the facts to when people say that girls, in fact, do mature more quickly in certain key ways than boys. And I felt, since cuteness was what I wanted to avoid at all costs, I felt that her romantic longings and desires would be taken more seriously than those of a little boy, and there would be a little bit more emotional complexity, depth, what have you. And then finally, I think movies with little girl protagonists, if they are made at all, seldom really succeed at the box office, and so it's a perversity of my nature that kind of rose to the challenge.
Well, there are certainly those who might be perverse and say the movie could be construed as metaphorical of your experience in the movie business.
I've been reading about this metaphor, and I haven't quite digested it. So I'd rather, if you want to pursue it, that's okay with me.
No, I'll move on to the next question, but it certainly seems to beg that. I mean, you talk about the way you structure the picture, and you take a protagonist who's really going to sort of hit the audience squarely in the heart, and the movie happens to be both funny and kind of heartbreaking at the same time, and I'm not going to say it's about passions, but it's about these unformed people who really love what they really love and are sort of backhanded by casual cruelty from all sides.
Right, and cruelty is a funny thing sometimes. People, I think, are completely unaware of when they are being in fact most cruel.
But this is I think the beginning of the selfish age. because, and not as a strictly as a motive, but because you become so sort of self-involved because you're wondering how you come off in so many ways. So
I actually think that actually as you get older, you learn to think, you learn to understand that you are not unique in ways you think you are. In fact, I think we are actually we are at our most selfish, most solipsistic at our earliest stages of life. And as you get older, that you slowly begin to discover that, oh, I am not alone. I am not the only one experiencing this pain. Other people have also, but that's something that dawns on people very slowly. I hate to pun, but
you're fighting a metaphor, but yet okay,
but it's
that's
there,
right.
so I couldn't resist, I guess. But I mean, the fact, I mean, where, you know, when she discovers that this bully is not just a bully and that there is pain there, just as she herself endures, there's something that's something you grow from, and I think that's it's in order to grow up, you have to begin to understand that you are not the only one suffering.
Well, that's the age too, and it certainly comes through in the movie where what you hate most about yourself is what actually makes you the most unique. I mean, you do want to be like those other people that you like, the people that are popular, even the hoods, you know, or the bad guys in school. I mean, she seems to want to try to relate to so many different groups, but she spends a lot of time alone. And one thing that's interesting is that there's not a lot of dialogue with her explaining herself. You let the situations play out. And it seems like to me it must have been, for that reason, an incredibly tough movie to write.
I think any movie is incredibly tough to write. I can't make special exceptions for myself and for this script. I think to do anything well, at least in my experience, nothing comes easily. One of the things that I was fearful of was that, I mean, it's 25 years since I'm an 11-year-old, and the question is, would kids, when they read this, say, oh, this is like outdated, kids don't talk like this anymore, or that it would sound like my lines filtered through the mouths of 11-year-olds. But I was very encouraged to discover that the kids, when they read the script, all read it were very matter of fact about it, very unfazed. They said, oh yeah, that's the way it is. Only I know kids who have it much worse than this one. The parents, it was another story. I think they were somewhat unsettled by the material, but the kids totally keyed into it, and I was very gratified and encouraged by that. How
did you find the kids that you ended up using in the picture?
Well, I would love to say that I discovered Dawn at a Baskin-Robbins in a mall with, you know, ice cream dribbling down her chin, but she was submitted by a manager, I have to admit. This is her first movie role, but she had done some theater, I think, or I'm not even sure exactly of what her resume was, but that was unimportant to me. What's important is what she brings to the role, in fact, is she has a certain, first of all, she's a remarkable actress, performer, and that was evidence immediately on the tape that I first saw her on. I was fearful that she was too beautiful, in fact, for the role, and so I felt I had to give her some flourishes in order to make it believable.
Such as?
That the way she dresses, her hair, etc., to make it believable that she would be the object of such scorn.
But she's very poised in front of the camera, though.
Yeah. Well, she has a grace to her awkwardness, is what I would say. But I think that at the same time, I mean, if I had like a real life Dawn Wiener, I think it would have been too much. I think it would have been too alienating. The audience would have been unable to connect with this character, because it would have been just too hard, too painful. And I felt that Heather Matarazzo, who plays Dawn Wiener, She walks that line, and it was kind of a leap of faith that, please, you know, but she really came through in a big way for me.
Did you think, as you were writing this movie, that, well, you would have to go on and work on something else, or have to once again immerse yourself in this sort of studio politics that you broke away from?
Well, I would say that I finished the movie at the end of June '95, and I was very despondent because I had little faith in the future prospects of this movie. I couldn't really foresee who the audience was. Just because I respond to something, I didn't give me the confidence that I thought anyone else would. And also, when you've come out of the process of directing, sometimes, at least in my case, you see what you didn't get, but sometimes it's very difficult to see what you did in fact achieve. You know, being a director is very different from being a writer, in that when you write, you have absolute control over your material, every word, every punctuation point. You can change the rules at any point you like, but they are yours. Because
it's all your movie, because it exists
yes.
purely in the abstract.
Yes. Well, right there on the page, you can just erase it if you want to, and you control it. You decide everything. However, as a director, you have to accept the fact that you don't have that absolute control, that there are such things as variables that enter the frame. Things like a mother who might say, I don't care, Johnny's going home in 10 minutes. I don't care what kind of shot you've got planned. He's going home in 10 minutes. Or if you have the location, the owner of the location saying, what are you doing here? You're burning a hole in my roof. You know, something that ultimately, things are constantly assaulting you, so that you're lucky in the end that you've even got something in the can.
But you talk about your perverse streak, and it seems like you did everything you could to make things more difficult for yourself. You wrote a movie about an 11-year-old girl. You were going to have to find untrained, basically, kids to be in this, but you have to deal with kids all day long. You have to try to raise the money for it, and then get a picture made that maybe nobody will want to see. You want to talk about this at all? I'm not in therapy, but maybe if you're suggesting I need that, no,
I don't know, but I think that it's, you know, it's a story. It's something that, for whatever reason, and maybe I can't really articulate it well, I was driven by what I had written, and you have to be to make it through all of this. I want to point one thing out, which is that, just to finish the point about being a director and all these variables that are forcing all these compromises upon you, there are sometimes at the same time some good things that can come into the frame, things that you hadn't invented, things that you don't have control of, that can actually be good for the movie. Things, the unplanned, the spontaneous discovered moment that you always hope will come out of the blue, Deus Ex Machina.
Well, we certainly had enough great moments here today. Todd Solondz, I want to thank you for being on the show. I'm Elvis Mitchell. Producer of the show is Tracy Sarajine. Please tune in next Friday at 2 p.m. for The Treatment on KCRW.